Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts. Hey Pete, have you ever been fascinated by the allure of secret societies throughout history?
Are you kidding me right now, Andy? I live for this stuff. From the Freemasons to the Illuminati, I am obsessed with these clandestine groups. The Rosicrucians and their ancient wisdom, the Skull and Bones Society at Yale with its powerful alumni network. I'm drawn to them. There's something about how they offer this exclusive access to hidden knowledge. They totally capture my imagination. It's like they give this sense of belonging to something greater than oneself.
Wow, sounds like you're looking for one yourself.
Do you even need to ask? Where do I sign? How much blood do I have to give? Are there any required tattoos or brands involved? Is it my first or second born that they need?
Well, what if I told you that there's a secret society for film lovers right here at the Next Reel family of film podcasts, all proud members of the True Story FM network, and you don't have to give any blood or either of your kids?
You've got my attention, Andy. What can you tell me about this cinematic brotherhood?
When you become a member of the Next Reel family, you gain access to a treasure trove of exclusive content, early episode releases, and a community of passionate film enthusiasts who share your love for movies. It's like being initiated into a secret order where you're privy to the inner workings of our shows, including the Next Reel, the Film Board, Movies We Like, Sitting in the Dark, and CinemaScope.
But Andy, as a member, will I unlock a world of bonus content from extended conversations and behind-the-scenes insights to exclusive pre-show and post-show discussions that expand the conversations about the films we love?
Why, yes, the true power of this secret society lies in its community. As a member, you'll join an exclusive group within our Discord community where you can engage in clandestine conversations with other passionate film fans in our members-only channels.
But what about live recordings, Andy? The sacred rituals of any good cinematic order. Will these episodes be scheduled in advance so that members like me will know when to gather around the virtual pyre in real time via YouTube?
Ah, yes. Perhaps the greatest secret of all is that by becoming a member, you're not just investing in your own entertainment, you're also supporting the tireless work of our independent creators and helping to keep the magic of cinema alive and well. So if you're ready to join this elite group of film lovers and unlock the secrets of cinema, head over to truestory.fm/join. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you will gain access to a world of exclusive content, engaging discussions, and a community that shares your passion for movies. Head to truestory.fm/join to sign up.
Andy, I can't wait for you to welcome me into the inner circle of the Next Reel family of film podcasts. I'll see you in the secret chambers. Now, when do I get my ring?
Well, we don't actually offer rings with your membership.
Tattoos or brands? When can I do that?
No tattoos.
Secret handshakes?
Tell you what, you and I can come up with our own secret handshake, okay?
No, I mean, at the very least.
Welcome to CinemaScope, where we embark on a thought-provoking journey through the rich tapestry of film history. I'm Andy Nelson, your guide on this quest to bridge genres, subgenres, and movements, ultimately deepening our understanding of them all. Today, we're immersing ourselves in the poetic and socially conscious world of the Iranian New Wave. Join us as we explore the movement's unique blend of realism, symbolism, and cultural commentary that challenged conventions and redefined Iranian cinema. Discover the innovative techniques, profound themes, and auteur-driven visions that characterized this groundbreaking era and uncover its enduring influence on contemporary global cinema. Prepare to be captivated by the Iranian New Wave's ability to find beauty and meaning in the everyday lives of ordinary people as we embark on this transformative cinematic journey. Joining me today, we have Kaveh Askari, Associate Professor and Director of the Film Studies Program at Michigan State University and author of the new book, Relaying Cinema in Mid-Century Iran. Welcome, Kaveh.
Hi, Andy. It's lovely to be here and talk about these films.
I am thrilled to have this conversation with you. It is an exciting bunch of films that Iran has been producing, like some amazing, amazing movies, and it's exciting to talk about it. Now, you've kind of studied Iranian cinema, you've written about it. What drew you to this topic and really kind of the Iranian New Wave?
Initially, I mean, I was very interested. I mean, if you want to go all the way back to sort of my high school or first cinephile days, I grew up in South Florida, or at least I went to high school in South Florida. There was not a whole lot in terms of kind of indie culture there, at least in the early 90s. And, independent record stores were hard to find. Bands wouldn't come down that far because it's about an hour drive from Atlanta to Miami. There was one art house cinema in Miami Beach and South Beach that I would drive to any chance I got and see everything they had sort of programming there. And in college, my initial introduction to cinema, there wasn't really a film studies program. I went to this little college, New College in Florida, but I worked as a projectionist. It was one of the 3 or 4 jobs I had to put myself through college. And especially during the summers in New Orleans, I lived in New Orleans during the summers, and I projected at a number of art house cinemas. I think I saw my first Iranian New Wave films on the big screen at those art house cinemas in New Orleans. I projected one of them and saw a couple because we had a reciprocal agreement with the other movie theaters. Once I made the transition to graduate school, the initial idea was to write a dissertation on cinema of Iran. I wasn't sure exactly how it was going to be configured, but I knew who I wanted to work with. That was at Chicago. And she had to take an unexpected leave when I arrived. And I wound up shifting my project and writing a dissertation about a kind of secondary topic that I was interested in. That was American silent film. That became my dissertation. That became my first book. And as I was finishing the first book, I returned to this theme, this topic of Iranian cinema, which eventually started out in research at the University of California, Berkeley, where I was doing a postdoc, and then continued through a couple of jobs and became the last book on Iranian cinema that I published, the last monograph.
Gotcha.
All that time and throughout grad school and throughout my teaching career, I've always been teaching the history of cinema in Iran, and with an intense focus on the new wave. So it's been a part of my studies from college on, but only in the last several years have I been publishing series of essays and this book on the subject.
Really digging in. Nice. Well, okay, so I want to look kind of macroscopically at the Iranian New Wave real quick before we really start diving in. It was very groundbreaking. It really kind of revolutionized Iranian cinema while also really kind of capturing the attention of people around the world. And it was really kind of pioneering this new style of realism with social commentary, focusing on ordinary people, their everyday struggles. I mean, you could argue that its success and appeal really was in its ability to kind of capture human experience really honestly, empathetically, and I mean, some pretty impressive artistic visions from some of these directors as well, who are also kind of challenging traditional narrative storytelling. It feels very diverse, very authentic, and also really kind of pushing Iran into kind of a major player in art house cinemas, kind of where you first saw it. So with all of that, before we kind of get into the origins and everything, I just want to get a sense as to why you think it was so successful and so influential that really resonated with so many people.
It's a fascinating art film, if we can call it a movement or a collection of smaller movements to study and to consider, because it is so fragmented in a way, right? It's fragmented by the revolution, that sort of before and after dramatically different production contexts. I think the larger view is, we could say, the Iranian New Wave is a way of describing a loosely connected group of art films made in Iran. And it's understood in relation to various new waves around the world, right? So whether or not directors are actively thinking of themselves as making new wave films, the way the films are being received and understood around the world is within the frame of other new waves that are playing at festivals or that are playing in university classrooms or art house cinemas, that kind of thing. So there are lots of different production contexts. There are some sponsored films in this group. There are some government-supported films in this group. There are, French co-productions in the later period. There's all kinds of interesting funding sources. The movement is, associated with first with a few names. Abbas Kiarostami is by far the most famous director of this movement, the most well-known outside of Iran. Of course, inside of Iran is a different story. But then that understanding kind of expanded outward to a number of directors, several of whom we'll get a chance to talk about in our discussion today. But yeah, I think the minimalism of a lot of these directors created a kind of filmmaking that traveled really well. The interest in realism, the interest in sort of the straddling the divide between documentary and fiction filmmaking forms, as you said, the sort of innovations in storytelling style, this kind of meandering storytelling style, all of those elements turned out to play very well in the sort of art house scene of the early 1990s, and the interest has kind of only grown since then.
Yeah, no kidding. So, help me get a sense of what Iran was like in the 60s and 70s when the Iranian New Wave really kind of had its seeds planted. And I guess to pair with that, what was Iranian cinema like before?
That's a really good question, because I think in order to understand the concept of the new wave or the sort of art cinema and how it's initially understood and how it continues to be understood is in opposition to another kind of filmmaking.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is the case with a lot of new waves. I know you did the French new wave on your show, and the sort of response to the tradition of quality could be an interesting comparison. Or if we talk about the new German cinema, the new German filmmakers' response to Papa's Kino, this kind of old or traditional form. In the case of Iran, the art cinema was in many ways a response by filmmakers and by critics to a kind of popular song and dance-based filmmaking that was dubbed by one of the most famous critics in Iran of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Hussein Qavusi. He called it film farsi. That is not two words, but a conjoined, a compound word, which is a pejorative word that was used to kind of describe these kind of formulaic, over the top, vulgar. I'm using his assessment,
his words, yeah.
Different relationship to these films, of course. And the art cinema, or the growth of the art cinema, was seen by many critics and filmmakers as a kind of response to that type of filmmaking. That studio production in Iran really got going after the war, kind of in the late 1950s. By the early 1960s. In terms of popular commercial films, there were maybe 30 or 40 productions, and then that ramped up to 80 productions a year. And there was a whole, a group of actors, a group of directors, some studio infrastructure there. There was also a move in the development of institutions that were connected to art filmmaking. So there was a number of important magazines. One really important magazine called Movie Star Magazine, Satariya Cinema, which started in the 1950s. And that was a place where a lot of critics got their start. It was also kind of a fan magazine. It had clip art that you could put up on your walls if you were a film fan. But it was an attempt to start to seriously discuss films in intellectual magazines of the time. There were growing numbers of film columns at the back of the magazine where intellectual critics could talk about those films. So that was kind of the larger intellectual environment in which this response to the popular commercial cinema of Iran could take shape. I guess one thing I would want to say about that is that we use this opposition to film farsi. A lot of my colleagues actually suggest not using that term at all because it's a negative term and it's a sort of denigration of popular cinema. I mean, I use it because it's a historical term that was in use at the time. And so we need to think why that term was in use and why, we can still use it as long as we consider it a historical term.
Sure. Gotcha. That makes sense.
But what I would suggest as different in this new wave from other the new waves that I compared it to, let's say the French New Wave or New German cinema, is that the popular cinema in Iran was not a cinema of kind of bourgeois inertia. It wasn't an institutional sort of static establishment cinema. Even the popular cinema was experimental. It was going in all these different directions. There were directors who saw themselves as interested in style. And there were, many directors who moved back and forth between the two forms.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So the division between these two kinds of filmmaking is an important one to make when we're trying to create categories, but I think it's also important to think about the ways they interlace with one another.
Yeah, right. No, that's interesting. Well, and I am curious because I'm assuming that some of these filmmakers also had been seeing, as we've been talking about, like the French New Wave or Italian neorealism, and likely were influenced and inspired by some of what those filmmakers were doing themselves and the way that they were pushing the boundaries of where their cinema had been and trying to do some new things with it as well.
That's very much the case. Yeah. Many of the filmmakers who started the first sort of art films or intellectual films in Iran were educated abroad, and they were able to see a number of films. There's the National Cinematheque in Tehran, which a filmmaker and critic named Kaveh Askari opens in the 1950s. He was a member of this federation of film archives. He was actually, I know you talked about Henri Langlois and the Cinematheque in Paris. He was a mentee of Langlois in Paris, and Lottie Eisner, who also worked at the Cinematheque, and he went back and forth between Paris and Tehran throughout his whole career and established the Cinematheque, which eventually led into the film archive, the National Film Archive that still exists today. So an example, and then there are just dozens of examples of filmmakers educated abroad. Merjoui, who made The Cow, which we'll talk about in a moment. I mean, he went to UCLA. He was a philosophy student, saw a bunch of these neorealist films, art films, new wave films in LA when he was a student there. And of course, there are many others. So they're being seen by filmmakers in Iran. There are lots of people doing translations, like Francois Truffaut's book on Hitchcock. There's an important filmmaker in Iran. He translated that Hitchcock book into Persian. So there's a whole history of translation and how that's connected to the new wave as well.
How were audiences reacting? Like, were they kind of treated like smaller art house types of films, or were they, as kind of the popularity was shifting, did audiences latch on to them, or were they kind of like, well, we'll just put that in an art house theater?
Just generally speaking, this kind of commercial storytelling, or this kind of art house storytelling, is not going to draw the same kind of crowds that a big genre film with big stars is going to draw. You know, you have a meandering plot with non-professional actors. I mean, that targets a particular kind of audience. But there is a sense in which, I mean, and this was kind of fascinating to me too, is, you know, there is a wide interest, even currently in Iran, for the directors that are making films that are kind of off the mainstream current, right? You know, you can get into a taxi and like I made 3 trips to Iran doing the research for my book, and took a lot of cabs to archives around Tehran, and had a number of conversations with cab drivers about the obscure films of this one art film director, right? So there's you would be surprised at how well known these films actually are, given the difficulty of their plot and their lack of big name stars and big budget productions.
That's interesting, really interesting. Were they experiencing censorship at this point in time, or did that start later?
Yeah. I mean, it's different kinds of censorship, right? So, a number of these films, and we can get into it more when we talk about individual films, but a number of these films were read allegorically as having potentially hidden critique of the regime embedded in their storytelling. Like The Cow, for instance, was it's about a cow, and it's about milk, and it's about this small village and sort of mental illness, this sort of surrealist depiction of that as a result of the loss of this cow. And it was read fairly commonly as an allegory for oil and the sort of dependence on oil and the regime's dependence on oil, that kind of thing. Those kinds of allegorical readings were absolutely common at the time, and they led to issues of particular films getting banned and that kind of thing. So, and then of course after the revolution, the forms of filmmaking that were allowable by government sponsorship transformed as well. Yeah,
we've started talking a little bit about the revolution. Let's give us some more information on it, like just so we have some context as to like How did the social landscape change with the revolution, which was late 70s, right?
That's right. Yeah, 78, 79. Most of the major transformations of the revolution happened in 78 and then sort of finalized in 79. There was, a number of different factors at play. And I think a lot of these earlier films from the 60s and 70s, even the popular ones, kind of thematize these transformations. There is, in the early 70s, a flush of a sort of financial boom as a result of global oil geopolitical situations. Iran becomes a major player and the ability to provide oil globally. There are a bunch of social transformations that happen as a result of that wealth. The popular cinema deals very often allegorically with these kind of transitions, these sort of modernization efforts in that time. And the turn in 78, 79 was a result of increasing dissatisfaction with the Shah's regime and the sort of way of ruling as a kind of secular absolute ruler. And that criticism was coming both from the left, from the organized left, as well as from the leaders that would eventually become the leaders of the Islamic Republic. It's very interesting in this discussion of the New Wave to talk about filmmakers whose careers started, and I think several of the filmmakers will talk about their careers started before the revolution, and then continued.
Kind of bridged it,
yeah. Exactly, like Abbas Kiarostami, he was, a filmmaker, a prominent filmmaker before the revolution. He was, he headed up the film section of this institute. This Qanun is the sort of shorthand name for this institute for the intellectual development of children and young adults. They made a lot of educational films for children, but he sort of cut his teeth as a formal experimenter in filmmaking with those early educational films that he produced for Qanun. Bahram Beyzai, who made Bashu the Little Stranger, which we'll talk about. He was also a very important theater director, translator, and filmmaker, art filmmaker before the revolution, and then his career continued full steam after. So I think it's really fascinating to trace not only the dramatic shifts that happened at the point of the revolution, but also these kinds of continuities from one period to another.
Yeah, that's interesting because we're getting, I think, on both sides of it, we're still getting kind of that sense of the realism, the traditional culture. I mean, they're more kind of the art house, these new wave films. So the lower budgets, I'm assuming, shooting on location, we're getting a lot of that sense of that type of production. But in all of it, it's still, again, both sides of the revolution, you're still really getting this personal exploration of Iranian identity. And I think that that's what's so fascinating because we're kind of witnessing the lives of just ordinary people before and after. And you can look at the stories as very personal and individual. But as you were saying, there's also this way of looking at these as more of allegorical. They're kind of like thematic representations of other things that are going on in society at the time.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, one of the stories, and I think what we can do during our discussion is I'll present multiple stories or versions of talking about this history. Just to indicate that there's not one definitive story, and every story is like a point of illumination on an issue, on a phenomenon. And like any point of illumination, it creates shadows. So another point of illumination, another story creates a different view and different shadows, right? And so I'll give sort of multiple versions of the story. One version is that after the revolution and really after the war, the Iran-Iraq war, because there wasn't a whole lot of like feature film production of the kind that we are talking about today that took place in that period in the early 1980s. There certainly was there, but it kind of really picks up in the late 1980s. So the war ends in 88. There was a system put in by the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance, which before the revolution was just called Ministry of Culture or Ministry of Culture and Art. It was a system of various stages of approval. So like, in the US, we supposedly have the First Amendment that protects speech and also protects sort of every stage of the production of that kind of speech or artistic expression. It's only when something is published, after something is published, that it can be deemed, obscene or whatever, that would be required to sort of restrict its accessibility to the public. In the system after the revolution, sort of every stage of the production of a film had to be vetted by the ministry. So
here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
In a world where podcasts are a dime a dozen, one show dares to stand out from the rest.
The Film Board, a podcast unafraid to tell it like it is.
We're here for one reason and one reason only: downloads.
That's right. We review new release movies because that's what gets people's attention.
But just because we're in it for the clicks doesn't mean we don't take our job seriously.
We're part of the Next Reel family of film podcasts, and we're proud of it.
Our reviews are just as insightful and thought-provoking as any of our other film podcasts.
It's just that this podcast is all about that sweet, sweet SEO.
The nectar squoze from the tree of Bing.
We're only human, but we're also creators.
And creators eat clicks to survive.
So if you want honest, unfiltered opinions on the very latest movies right on opening weekend,
delivered with the self-awareness of a team looking for downloads,
then tune in to The Film Board,
where every download counts, but yours counts the most.
You would submit a script. The script would have to be approved. You submit a production plan, that would have to be approved. An early cut, and then and so on. So
every step of the way.
Yeah. But at the same time, there was a restriction on imported films because any film that for example, showed certain relationships between genders, women who weren't covered, other sort of elements of sort of more morality-based restrictions on film content. Those films would not be allowed to be shown in public theaters. So there was a continuing desire to see films and an inability to import a lot of the films that were circulating globally. So it did create a kind of interesting market for offbeat, interesting, innovative films to emerge because they had less competition commercially, right? And so as much as the restrictions inhibited the kinds of representations that could be shown on a big screen, and this is to say nothing of the informal market, right? And circulation,
sure, yeah.
DVDs. We see some of that in some of the films that we'll be talking about. But in terms of the formal market for films, the big cinemas, there was a kind of open opportunity for local filmmakers to present films on the big screens there without that kind of commercial competition.
So, just trying to get a sense of. I know it's always hard to say with these sorts of things, but like the start and end of the new wave, when would you say that like it really started? I know we're talking about kind of films that are like right at the start, kind of maybe even precursors to the movement. Is it something that ever really ended? Or, I mean, are all of these films, we're talking about films all the way up into until 2015, are they all still Iranian New Wave, or are they just films that are kind of like post-New Wave influenced by the New Wave?
Yeah. This is another question with several stories and several points of illumination. I mean, I think you can make the argument in terms of when it started, right? And people have made this argument. And you can make the argument that it started in the 1950s, or in the mid-1960s, or in 1969, or in the 1990s, and I'll explain why each of those is important. Right? If you say it started in the late 1950s and early 60s, you position the start at the moment when there is a kind of critical mass of intellectuals making films, right, and making films that are not necessarily designed just to cater to a mass market or popular audience, that are doing something beyond pure entertainment, and also films that are made in conversation with the growing intellectual culture around cinema. That is, these translations that I was talking about, that are, these books that are being translated into Persia, and these critical columns in intellectual magazines, the Cinematheque, this culture of seeing films for a third and fourth time, and really understanding cinema not as a disposable, consumable form of culture, but as something to be reflected upon, to be considered again. There was, film clubs, a couple of important film clubs, one started by the critic who coined the term film farsi.
Oh, okay.
So that would be the sort of late 50s, early 60s coordinate for the start point. The mid 60s coordinate for the start point would be the kind of change that happens with a couple of really important films like Brick and Mirror, which we'll talk about, by Ibrahim Golestan, who was making a number of nonfiction films, but this was a kind of important feature film that he made. The first film, by some accounts, with direct sound. Right, almost all films were dubbed. Continued to be after this point as well. It was also shot in CinemaScope. Just to plug the title.
Right, yeah.
Of your podcast, with
there you go.
anamorphic CinemaScope widescreen lens. That was a film that he happened to deposit a few prints of those. When I was a graduate student at University of Chicago, I found them in the back of this storage library, all of his films, or a collection of his films. And we started preservation work with those. And I remember the first projection of that film. And, we had to get out the anamorphic lens and use our 35 mm projector in the film viewing room to see what was going on there. So that film, Brick and Mirror, Night of the Hunchback, also by Ghaffari, who started the Cinematheque. Kamran Shirdel, a documentary filmmaker, made a film around that time called The Women's Quarter. There were a number of kind of rise of intellectual films that are made in that period, in sort of early mid 1960s. Probably the most common starting point discussed in, if you look for kind of mainstream histories of this, is 1969. And that has to do with the release of two important films. One is Qaisar by Masoud Kimiai. That film was a kind of socially serious crime revenge thriller. It's actually a very loose adaptation of Nevada Smith, the Western with Steve McQueen. If you've seen that. But it's a sort of revenge narrative, but socially serious, interesting. Its style takes its dialogue very seriously. That film marked a kind of shift. And then The Cow, which is this kind of it borrows elements of neorealism, but also of this kind of surreal world. It's interested in mental illness and the sort of transformation of the world as a result of that. Those two films were award-winning films at festivals, and they, for many historians, marked this kind of shift. But then finally, the last date that I said was the early 1990s, right?
Right.
And we could think of that as a start point, not of the first films that were made. There were other festival films, Iranian films that played at festivals before that. But this was the moment when it was a consistent sort of pipeline between Iran, films that are made in Iran, and major film festivals. And these films started recognition at the Cannes Film Festival in Berlin and various places around the world. These sort of top tier festivals. They started winning awards. The White Balloon in 1995 by Panahi. We'll talk about another one of his films. I mean, that film had a huge success on the kind of alternative cinema circuit, on the art house circuit in the mid 90s. So in some way, this is a definition of the start of the new wave that isn't about the start of the production of the films, but the start of the world recognizing this movement and start trying to understand how this movement was taking shape. And most of the most well-known directors, even today, are directors. Many of the most well-known directors are directors that really gained fame at this moment of entry into the sort of festival world and art house world around the world.
There are so many fascinating films, and it's it's interesting to see kind of the evolution of all of that. And it's interesting, like the fact that you brought up all those different touch points as potential starting places for this new wave, because you can really see how all of those could actually be a shift or the next phase of it, or however you want to look at it. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to continue our conversation. Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Horror movies get a bad rap. They're cheap thrills, mindless gore, not cinema, blah, blah, blah.
But we here at Sitting in the Dark know better. We know that horror is more than just jump scares and chainsaws. It's a reflection of our deepest fears, our anxieties, Okay, and there's a lot of jump scares and chainsaws.
Join us, Pete Wright, Tommy Metz III, Kyle Olson, and Keenan Diaz, as we cut into the dark heart of horror cinema.
Every episode, we explore a different facet of the genre, from survival horror to home invasions, from zombies to birds. We tickle the tropes, analyze the angles, and sharpen our own axes along the way.
We'll introduce you to the classics that shaped the genre.
And the modern masterpieces that are pushing the boundaries of terror.
Sitting in the Dark is your guide to navigating the terrifying, thrilling, and sometimes hilariously bad world of horror movies.
We'll help you understand why we love to be scared.
And maybe even convert you into a horror fan yourself.
So turn off the lights, close the basement door,
and join us.
Sitting in the dark.
All right, we are back. So let's talk about kind of like what makes up an Iranian New Wave film. Like, what are the core components? I mean, you've already kind of talked about how the stories are very diverse. There's not really like, it's not a specific subgenre. It's kind of a wide variety of types of stories. But what are the things that really make up what we've come to recognize as a film from the Iranian New Wave?
And, you know, there are a couple of things that I think stand out, and to anyone even tangentially familiar with the movement, these things will be the first things that kind of come to mind. And in fact, the thing that's coming to my mind right now is, you know, you were talking about the ways I was introduced to these films. You know, indie video stores was for me, you know, being an adolescent and young adult in the 1990s. I was able to access most of these films on VHS, right? From these sort of art independent video stores in New Orleans and in Florida, there were some of those, and I would bring them home to watch. Had 2 VCRs. Also got, you know, you also get these from like Iranian grocery stores. You know, a lot of diasporic communities, you know, have this kind of, you know, the sort of general store, a grocery store, you know, sells a collection of VHS tapes or later DVDs. And my roommates at the time when I was in college actually had a song that they sang that was, the verses of the song were these different characteristics of these films that I kept bringing home and watching. One of the characteristics is the preponderance of child protagonists, right?
Sure, right, yeah.
You know, young children and young adults as protagonists for the films. You know, part of that, and this has been discussed extensively in the first phase of discovery of these films, and continues to be. It has to do with the ability to make films that can be approved through government sponsorship, Ministry of Culture sponsorship. You know, films about children sidestep adult situations, and adult situations
a little easier, yeah,
are complicated to represent. Of course, there were a lot of filmmakers making films with adults in them too, but that's sort of one factor. And with those child protagonists as well, there's, you know, this Institute for the Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults, which starts in, you know, before the revolution, but continues on and provides a place from which these kinds of stories can grow. So even if they're not directly educational films, they're films about a couple of child characters with a kind of moral lesson attached to them. The dialogue is minimal. Child actors are kind of interesting to work with in this realist style. And as you said before, a lot of these filmmakers are interested in this sort of long history of using child protagonists in art cinema, in Italian films made right after the Second World War. And I know you talked about in your French New Wave episode, Truffaut and Antoine Doinel's character in 400 Blows, and the child as being used as a way to explore a world and to understand a world in a way that is not beholden to the habits of perception and the habits of understanding that get sort of solidified in us in adulthood. So it's a way of portraying a world that is very open, a perception of a world that is very open for all of these traditions. So the child protagonist is an important component, one that is repeated in a number of these films. The sort of move between documentary and fiction, sort of nonfiction forms and fiction forms working in relation to one another. The reflexivity that comes as a part of that, or to phrase it another way, these are films about the process of filmmaking. They're films about the possibility of what is it that film can represent, and what are the limits of what film can represent? How close can a film world get to the world outside of that sort of fictional reality? And so these films are often examinations of that, and they move back and forth between stage sequences and sequences that are more like documentary sequences between fiction and nonfiction, as a way to sort of push the limits of what is representable in film. And then, of course, these kind of humanist themes, which is another thing that you brought up earlier. These stories that have, they're minimalist, and they speak to experiences that resonate with audiences around the world. There's certainly a complicated cultural specificity to the way these representations are happening, but they can also be understood as simple minimalist stories. And so there's a way for anyone to engage with these stories, regardless of their level of understanding of the cultural context in which they're produced.
And, they're also just giving us a beautiful sense of Iran because, I don't know, from my perspective, it seems a lot of this is location shooting. They're not, maybe there are some sets, but a lot of it feels very much locations based with non-professional actors working in these situations to kind of craft these stories. And so I don't know, that's always exciting to see anyway, in film, because you're really getting a sense of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And location is such an important part of these. A lot of directors, they will return to the same location for a number of films. Like Kiarostami made the Kokar trilogy, which is about returning to this same place for stories that build on the previous story, right? Or filmmakers who make films about particular neighborhoods, urban neighborhoods in Tehran, they return to the same neighborhood, and the location is absolutely essential for these films, and an understanding of those neighborhoods and those locations it rewards viewers who know those things, as well as viewers who are engaging with these other kind of broader themes.
And also for people like me, and this is really kind of true for any type of movie, I suppose, but I love getting a sense of, you have an idea of Iran as a country, but within that country, my perception is it's Iran, and because I've never been to Iran, so I don't really have as much a sense. And so when I see a lot of films in kind of like the dry, dusty areas, I kind of have this picture of Iran. But then you watch something like Bashu, the Little Stranger, and it's about a kid who goes all the way up to the northern end of Iran and ends up in a place that I'm like, okay, this doesn't look like the Iran that I'm used to. There's people who are clearly, for this kid, speaking a totally different language in a different. So you're getting a sense of like these different communities and these different geographic areas of the country, which is also nice, especially for somebody who's not from there.
Absolutely, yeah, and Bashu, I mean, that film very much thematizes the sort of differences between the North and the South, and Arabic-speaking communities in the South, and in the North, the speakers of a dialect that is specific to that region. Although they all can come together and speak standard Persian, that's kind of what the drama is. Yeah. Is about. But then you go from, a very lush, rain-soaked environment where you can grow rice where Bashu winds up versus where he's from, which is the Gulf region, which is relatively arid. And then there are other directors as well that we're not talking about who their careers and their location interests are primarily in certain regions, like Amir Naderi, who is from the south of Iran. He made The Runner and a new film that is, well, not a new film, but a film that he made for Qanun that has just been beautifully restored. The English title is Waiting. It's a shorter film, but it's all about it's about sort of life in the South as sort of regionally distinct from the other parts of Iran. And I think we want to make sure in our understanding of this, Tehran is a commercial center, but we don't want to place Tehran as the sort of default, and we expand outward and think of all these filmmakers making these stories that are about regional identity, about multi-ethnic identity in Iran, about the number of languages that are spoken in addition to standard Persian. These are all sort of baked into a lot of the films of the filmmakers that we'll be talking about, and many others.
Yeah. Well, let's start jumping into the films. So we're talking about 5 films today. The House is Black, The Brick in the Mirror, The Cow, Taste of Cherry, and At 5 in the Afternoon. And then for members, we will have a continued conversation at the end of the episode in which we'll discuss 5 more films from the Iranian New Wave: Bashu the Little Stranger, which we just mentioned, A Moment of Innocence, Children of Heaven, Tales, and Taxi. If you want to hear that conversation, visit truestory.fm/join, where you can learn more about membership and all the benefits that you get. All right, so first up, we're talking about the 1962 documentary The House is Black by Farrokhzad. This groundbreaking short documentary, directed by this celebrated Iranian poet, offers a poignant and humanizing portrait of life in a leper colony in northern Iran. Through a combination of unflinching imagery and her poetic narration, drawn from the Old Testament and the Quran, the film challenges societal stigmas and calls for empathy and understanding. The House is Black is a powerful early example of the Iranian New Wave's commitment to social realism and its ability to find beauty and humanity in the face of adversity. So let's start with the director, Farrokhzad. She's a poet, and how did that kind of influence the approach to this subject?
Yeah, that's this film certainly has its realist elements. It has its social engagement as part of it, but its form, I don't think, can be meaningfully understood without understanding her interest in poetic form.
Yeah,
not only was she a poet, but she's perhaps the one of the, if not the most well-regarded modern poet of this period. Died tragically young, and wasn't extensively involved in filmmaking, but was the primary creative force behind this film, as well as the editor of another film by her collaborator Ebrahim Golestan, who directed Brick and Mirror. This film is, as you said, about a leper colony, and it moves between. It's easy to find, and it's a wonderful film to sort of get introduced to the possibilities of this filmmaking, and it's a short film as well.
Right. Yeah.
It moves between a number of different kind of oppositions, right? One very obvious one is the poetic voice, which is her own voice, and the sort of scientific objective voice describing the treatment of leprosy and sort of what is needed, the resources that are needed, what sort of process are needed to cure leprosy. And so it kind of toggles back and forth between this objective scientific frame and this sort of poetic frame. But in terms of like actual form, of the film, it's a film you've talked a couple of times, or you've asked me a couple of times about the depiction of everyday life, right? This is a film that is very much about everyday life, but not in that kind of long take, sit back and let the scenes of the rural village unfold. It's a film that is very heavily edited, very modernist in its structure, where these elements of everyday life become part of the rhythm of the actual cutting of the film, right? So the recitation in school, it's the sort of we hear the kind of verbal rhythm of the sort of recitations as an element of poetic form. One character engages in this kind of aimless singing, like kind of whistling when you're doing something else, like and that sort of that singing becomes a part of the rhythm of the film, becomes part of the editing of the film. There's a wedding, there's scenes of prayer, scenes of play, scenes of dining, scenes of work, and each one of those sort of rhythms of daily life get sort of factored, get formed into the poetic rhythm of the editing of the film itself.
And it also really kind of gives you, as a good documentary should, it's giving you a sense of life in this colony, but also just the fact that it's just life in a town, and these are people, and they're having happy moments, they're having rough moments. You're kind of getting a variety of what life is like. It's not just a medical documentary exploring like how these doctors treat people who are suffering from leprosy. Like that's in there, but it's not the focus, right? And we're really kind of building a sense of their life. And I thought that was a fascinating angle for this that I really appreciated, because we're really getting a sense of more of who these people are.
Yeah, and I would say, even the medical scenes, that have this kind of scientific air to them, they're portrayed in close up. We see characters wincing during treatments. I mean, there's a lot of camera choices and staging choices of those scenes that are designed to provoke a reaction in the viewer in a way that a purely scientific documentary would be. It would all be presented as visible evidence, right? Evidence of a kind of treatment, of the effectiveness of that treatment. That's certainly here in the documentary, but there's a tension between visible evidence, visual evidence, and visual aesthetics, right? That is constantly sort of moving back and forth in the film. There's a tension between, beauty and grotesque imagery. There's a tension between everyday life, not just everyday life and the treatment of the disease, but everyday life and spiritual practice, or some sort of relationship to the transcendent, or some sort of relationship to beauty that is sort of emerges from those everyday practices. So there's every time you start to think about what the movie is about, it shifts its frame on you.
It's easy to see this kind of like as either kind of like a start, an early start of the New Wave, or like a precursor to where we were going to go, but it definitely feels like this is a great example of committing to that realism, that social critique that we're kind of seeing here. I think that's exciting to see, because we're kind of getting a sense of filmmakers using their medium to provide social commentary and to challenge these societal stigmas that we have,
Yes. Yes. And this film was initially screened as a kind of social, kind of medical policy, a media work that was to engage the scientific community as well as the filmmaking community. So, yeah, I mean, thinking of this, I think your question is more about, so why go back to this film as one of the potential origins of the new Iranian cinema, right? Because it's not a film that marks the start of a certain kind of production community. It's not a film that, it's certainly, especially her, her filmmaking and her poetry as well, has influenced a number of films and titles of films that refer back to lines from her poems, or titles of her poems, that their prevalence in the new wave of filmmakers of later decades. But it offers a very sort of poetic introduction to the new wave, and kind of thinking about it as a film that explores what is possible in terms of what filmmaking, that it pays close attention to its style, close attention to its form, that breaks from tradition, mainstream traditions, what that makes possible, right? What kinds of imagination that makes possible. So in that way, it is a great film to go back to in terms of origins.
Yeah, to kind of kick things off. Let's look at our next film. This is from Ibrahim Golestan, 1965, The Brick and the Mirror. When a taxi driver discovers a baby girl abandoned in the back of his cab, he and his girlfriend must navigate the complexities of Iranian society and bureaucracy as they attempt to find a proper home for the child. Along the way, they confront their own relationship issues and the harsh realities of life in contemporary Tehran. Directed by Golestan, The Brick and the Mirror is an early example of the New Wave's use of neo-realist techniques and its focus on the challenges faced by ordinary people in a rapidly changing society. We've already talked about this one a little bit. Its use of kind of the CinemaScope, widescreen and everything, shooting on location, and capturing some beautiful and especially dark, cinematically, we're filming a lot of it at night, but a lot of dark imagery around Tehran. And I want to start kind of with the location of this, because I feel like so much of this is really kind of location-based, the incredibly moody, hallucinatory almost first place that he goes into to try finding this mother who left the baby in the cab. We're walking through this creepy place with these stairs, echoes, a woman that he's talking to who it all feels very dreamlike. And we start there, and then we kind of are going around at night and then later through the day of trying to figure out what to do with this child. And I feel like it's all contained as far as the story of his journey, but it really is kind of this journey film that I felt, because he's really trying to figure out what to do with this baby, but also trying to navigate a potential step forward with his girlfriend in a relationship if they decide to keep it.
And if I remember the production history of the film right, that film in that kind of vacant structure was the first one that they shot, and the film was made, as you said, in widescreen with direct sound, which was incredibly difficult to do, even for the Hollywood productions that were coming into Iran in the late 60s. They were finding, especially doing location shooting, like a lack of access to reliable electricity to run all their equipment. They'd have to run generators, and then the generators would make noise, and they would ruin takes and bury the generators underground. And I mean, there's a whole set of logistical problems once you introduce sound recording on location into these productions, and they took this on with this film. In that scene in the vacant structure, the building, there are a lot of jump cuts that we see in that particular scene, which contrast to some of the long takes and the long shot framing that we see in other parts of the film. So you can see the filmmaker really exploring a number of different stylistic possibilities in the construction of the film. Long tracking shots, complicated framing, and interesting performance. I think the other most prominent location in the film is the apartment, is the main character's apartment. That's the center of the film, and it's 30-40 minutes. In the middle of the film, it's this sort of long discussion. It's just the couple, and they're sort of back and forth about the child, and there's this really interesting play with sort of light and surveillance and visibility in the city. He's constantly talking about his neighbors seeing him and being sort of surveilled by all of his neighbors, and
peeking out the curtains to make sure no one's watching.
yeah, looking out the curtains, and she keeps repeating over and over again, make it light, right? And there's a flashlight in the there's kind of a love scene in the film that we don't see, but the camera sort of tracks into the flashlight that's on the shelf by the wall, and so there's this kind of theme of light and illumination, but paired with questions of surveillance, and that scene as well recalls, like in Breathless, in the Godard film. I keep going back to sure. Because you've done that episode, but that film has this kind of key long lovers discussion, kind of meandering conversation that is at the core of that film as well. So the film is in conversation with, I think, a lot of these tropes of global new waves, or new waves that are kind of circulating around, and everybody sort of trying out different aspects and seeing what works and what doesn't.
It's really fascinating to watch this one, and it's so much of it really is about like what to do with the baby, right? Like after work, I mean, he's working late, so when the baby is abandoned, it's the middle of the night. He goes to the bar and hangs out with his friends, and they have a whole variety of different opinions as to what he should do. Go to the police. Don't go to the police. Are you crazy? Like all these different things, and some of them are more like he's got one friend who seems like kind of the intellectual of the group, who has like painted this whole depiction of the way things probably are. But then, it ends up with he and his girlfriend, and, he tries going to the police, and they're like, what do you want us to do? We can't keep it. So, keep it until we find out if the mother comes asking for it. And then meanwhile, his girlfriend is like, I think it's meant for us to keep. We should keep it and raise it, and we can create a family. And it kind of creates a variety of different dilemmas about what to do. And I think there's something interesting, and I suppose in the scope of Iranian New Wave and everything we've been talking about, as far as like themes, allegories, things like that, is there something in this sense of their attempts to find a solution that kind of serves as, I guess you could say, a microcosm of larger societal issues going on in Iran at the time?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many points to that question that I think would be exciting to talk about. I mean, first, what I would say, we were talking about sort of realist styles that are circulating around the world. I mean, one of the important principles of Italian neorealism is the question of moral obligation, right? It's the question, it's a style, but more than a style, it's a question of how do I appropriately relate to my social world? How can I engage with my world in a way that is not pre-processed, in a way that's not, sort of determined by commercial culture or determined by the selfishnesses of living in that commercial culture, right? How do I navigate urban bureaucracy, right? That kind of thing. So that's very much a theme in this film. I mean, they have this question of it's about the couple, but the formation of the couple is not like a typical narrative formation of a couple. It's about a couple coming together around a question of their moral obligation to this innocent life that has found its way into their sort of everyday world. So at every stage, and the film is very episodic in its structure, right? At every stage, they're encountering a different sort of facet of that sort of quest to find the right path, right? The correct path. And they're going to many officials who should help in that path, and then all they're confronting is obstructions and other forms of selfishness and uncaring bureaucrats who don't want to help, even though it's supposedly the job of their agency to help. The police, for example, the orphanage, the friends at the bar, that are sort of dandy figures who just kind of want to spin the situation into a narrative, as you were saying, of, just to show off their literary chops and cite Kristen Lavren's daughter and, talk about the mysticism of crossword puzzles and, these kinds of, caricatures of intellectuals with no social grounding. It's important to see Golistan as a filmmaker who had a very committed politics and as well as a filmmaker who was interested in exploring films that tracked moral obligation. One of the interesting things that kind of talk about the film's sort of relationship to those obligations is even that kind of last shot, the last shot in the orphanage where, she sort of stands with her back against the wall and is sort of confronting, she's going in searching for this one child, and then she just gets overwhelmed by this entire room full of children, each with their own story, right? That kind of it's a single hero's quest, and then it opens up into an examination of the social challenges of an entire city, and that one story, resolving that one story isn't going to resolve this larger. And then she just gets overwhelmed and leans back against the wall, and the camera just kind of leaves her there. The filmmaker, he came to Chicago and screened that film, right after I'd finished graduate school. And he was just saying, like, that was the moment where I decided that I wasn't going to judge her either way. I was saying, this is her decision to lean up against the wall, stay there. And I was just going to pull the camera back and leave this character in this place. So what I wanted to say about that in terms of this question of moral obligation is that he very much engages with those questions, but it's not a didactic film in that it gives us a clear solution or a resolution to these characters' story, right? It presents the problem in a full way and then allows us to just sort of take our time to absorb that problem.
Which I think you could probably argue is what you're going to get out of a lot of films in most new waves, right? They're more content leaving it that way, where we're going to be kind of thinking about it and chewing on these ideas ourselves afterward.
Yeah, there's a suspicion of propaganda in many of these cases, right? A suspicion of certitude, especially thinking about the origins and the post-war moment, and all the damage that resulted from the certitudes of the previous 10 years, 15 years during the war.
Yeah. Let's shift our attention to The Cow. We've talked about it a little bit. This was from 1969, Darius Merjoui. In a small Iranian village, a poor man's beloved cow, his only possession, dies unexpectedly. Distraught and unable to cope with the loss, the man begins to believe that he is the cow, taking on its behaviors and mannerisms. As the villagers struggle to understand and help him, the film offers a powerful allegory for the human condition and the way in which society deals with grief, loss, and mental illness. This film is considered it sounds like a pretty seminal work in the Iranian New Wave, as we talked about. This potentially, the 1969, this film and another one, may be one of the starts of the New Wave here. And it does feel very neo-realist in the way that the film is put together, but also very allegorical in the way that it's kind of exploring universal themes and the way that, like, what does the cow represent as we're following the passion and joy he gets out of life when he's with his cow or thinking about his cow. And then when he finds out that, he thinks initially his cow ran away, as the villagers tell him, and then learns that his cow actually died. And it really kind of drives him into this dark place of where he really does seem like he's mentally broken. As far as this kind of the Iranian New Wave, what it's doing, this definitely has a specific approach to narrative and characterization as far as the way that it's exploring this story. And I don't know, let's, I guess, just talk about that a little bit as far as what Merjoui is doing with this film.
I think a lot of the discussions of new waves need to make space for a variety of stylistic approaches, right? This isn't a movement, and many of new waves that you might talk about on your show are not homogenous in their approach to a particular form of filmmaking, and it transforms over time and with different technologies. I think initially the reception of this film wanted to show its similarities with these kinds of realist forms, these kinds of very location shooting based explorations of physical reality. But this film also is very much about the interior psychological world of our main character. It has a number of characters who may or may not be real, that sort of represent this kind of looming presence, but they have this surreal dimension to it. And I think that's kind of one of the elements of his filmmaking. And he made his filmmaking style has transformed so many times over the course of his career. Right before this film, when he came back, I mentioned that he studied in Los Angeles and was a philosophy student and saw a bunch of films. Right when he came back to Iran, he made a film called Diamond 33, which is kind of like a James Bond comedy spoof in color, and has like a Goldfinger character, and which is very, wow. He describes it as a technical success, which enabled him to make more films. He kind of downplays. I mean, it's an interesting film in itself, but 180 degree shift from that film to this film, shot in black and white, starring an important theater actor. That performance is a key component. So it's not non-professional actors. This is a highly trained performer delivering the kind of performance that you would get from a highly trained performer. So yeah, it's pulling in a lot of different elements of kind of putting them together. I think one of the things we could say about it is, and the things that he said about the film is that oftentimes this kind of surrealist dimension, this dimension that is interested in extreme psychological states, are about critiquing the certainty of our reality, right? The traditional understandings of reality are, that kind of confidence is something this realist wanted to unsettle. But whereas that tradition often fetishizes mental illness and thinks of it as this like gateway to mysticism. Merjoui says about this that art for him critiques reality from a position of affection, right? Not from revenge. And so this film has a kind of softer configuration than some of the other films that we could say from this kind of surrealist tradition. It's a gentle criticism of reality, even though it's a very intense film.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I mean, is it, as far as like the cultural context of Iran at the time, you talked earlier about the relationship with the country and oil and everything. I mean, how else are we looking at this film through different eyes as far as like what they might be talking about?
Any film that leads to multiple interpretations can also open itself up to an interpretation that it could be a secret, a form of not just social critique, but also political critique. So, there is a tradition of seeing this film as an allegory of the dependence on oil that I said before. The milk from the cow is the madness that ensues from that kind of dependence, and the sort of figures looming in the background could be seen as kind of police figures or something like that. Again, many stories, many narratives, each one providing its own point of illumination. We should consider consider a lot of them at once. Yeah,
no kidding. Let's shift gears. We're going to jump a little bit of time all the way to 1997, talk about Abbas Kiarostami's Taste of Cherry. This film follows a middle-aged man, Mr. Badi, who drives around the outskirts of Tehran searching for someone to assist him in his planned suicide. As he engages in conversations with various passengers, including a soldier, a seminary student, and a taxidermist, the film explores themes of life, death, and the human search for meaning. Through its minimalist style, long takes, and powerful performances, Taste of Cherry offers a contemplative and deeply humanistic meditation on the value of life and the interconnectedness of individuals in society. We're jumping a little bit in time, as I said, and this is, I guess, our first film that we're going to be discussing. This would now be post-revolution, so we're a different period in Iranian history and the way the filmmakers were working. But this film also is just, we're looking at something that's a little more existential and everything. I guess let's just start with what Kiarostami is doing here. It's a kind of minimalist, the way that this film is designed, very long takes in order to kind of explore this story. And again, going back to what we were talking about with The Brick in the Mirror, it also leaves us in a sense of the unknown, and we're not exactly sure what the final decision is of this person.
Yeah, and in terms of its form, the minimalism is and what we see, and also what is absent in the film, is a really important way to understand the film. I think just a little bit of context of production, I think, helps. This film also had direct sound recorded, not with a film camera, with a video camera, and the majority of the film takes place as a conversation between two characters, our main character and one of these three supporting actors that he meets through his journey. And for the most part, those two actors were not in the same car at the same time. So all the conversations in the car, the director would sit in the position of the other character and film that person, and then stitch together this shot reverse shot composition in post-production. So when we see these actors interacting with the main character, what we are really seeing is their interactions with the director, with Kiarostami himself, right? There's something, he's very interested in playing with that, positioning himself as the filmmaker in these sort of gaps and stitching together a fictional world where you can still see the stitches and you can still be aware of them in some way. We should also say since this is the first film of his we're talking about. I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but he's of course the filmmaker who was the most well known during this period when Iranian cinema, art house cinema, became something that the world was talking about. There were articles about him in Cahiers du Cinéma, the famous French magazine. Kiarostami, The Magnificent was the title of one of those articles. This film, a lot of his films received a lot of festival recognition. This film actually won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. It generated some controversy at the time. So a lot of critics were talking about him and digesting his films. When I first moved to Chicago for graduate school, I remember it was right when this film came out, or right after this film came out, and there was a big debate between Roger Ebert and Jonathan Rosenbaum about Ebert thought that the film winning the award was like The Emperor's New Clothes, and that it was too minimalist for his taste. And Rosenbaum came back and said, no, in fact, let's actually look at these themes and the relationship to his other work and unpack these kind of layers of meaning in a seemingly simple film. When I teach the film, I teach it as I often joke that it's the fourth film in a trilogy, because he has the Coquer trilogy, which starts with Where is the Friend's House, which is the film that kind of put him on the map. And then there are two other films that are all about this same place where the characters go. This film is not about that place. It's about Tehran, or sort of the outskirts of the city. The main character lives in the city, but it follows the pattern of those three films from that trilogy. There's a lone character on a quest, searching for something. There are these zigzag paths. We need to remember that Kiarostami's original training was as a graphic designer. And so, there's a really important attention to graphic composition of the elements inside the frame in this film and in all of his films. And of course, that meandering path that we see the characters driving up and down throughout the entire film serves as a way of figuring the kind of storytelling that he's interested in, a storytelling of obstructions, of dead ends, of, as the Turkish taxidermist, the final character that he encounters in the film says, let's not take the direct route. Let's take this route. It's a little bit longer, but it's more beautiful, right?
Yeah, right.
But, I think that kind of encapsulates this approach to a narrative that's not a straight line of causality. It's a narrative that kind of keeps going back and forth in all these different directions.
And I can see what you're saying, because Where's the Friend's House? You definitely have that same sort of thing as the young boy, the path that leads from his little village to the other one that his friend lives in. It's like this big zigzag that goes up a hill, and then he goes over the hill, and then it's this big trail that goes down. It cuts through a cemetery. Like, even the streets, everything is very meandering in that film as well. So you can really get that sense in these stories, the way that he's crafting them.
Yeah, meandering and not realist either. That path is deliberately cut into the hillside in that way with those jagged edges, right? If we're talking about these films as being just sort of purely about location shooting and realism, we'll miss all this kind of deliberate graphic compositions, and we'll miss a lot in there in the creative choices that contribute to it.
Yeah, because I'm assuming that in this film, he's not making all of these roads, but he certainly picks some very specific roads. There's that one position that's like higher on a hill, and you see the car come around, and then it kind of gets obscured by a hill as it passes by, and then it comes out the other side, and you go to that over and over and again, and it's fascinating to watch, and it's patient the way that you follow these paths. You kind of meander along with this driver, and in this quest to find somebody to help him in this suicide that he's aiming to do. And basically all he's asking is I haven't decided yet. I might kill myself. I just want you to bury me if I did, or help me out of the hole if I didn't. And that's really kind of his request. And it is a strange request, and it does put you into that headspace. And this goes back to our conversation about moral decisions and what do you do? Is this right to help in this way, or is this something that you shouldn't get involved in, or should you call a helpline and get them to come help this person? And that's another interesting angle in this, and we follow through that with all of these different conversations.
Yeah, it's very much this. The film is a meditation on life and death, and I mean it's the narrative itself, the sort of assisting him with a proper burial if he chooses to commit suicide, which is never revealed whether he will or won't. But it's also the sort of specter of death is figured in a number of scenes. I mean, there's one scene when he's at a construction site, and there are all these images of his shadow projected over the earth, moving into various like trucks and holes, and so he's we're seeing an image of him buried several times in the film before we ever see him inside this hole that he may or may not be buried in the film.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a great film. Really interesting. Let's move into the last film on our list. This is Samir Makhmalbaf's At 5 in the Afternoon from 2003. I started this film and I was like, wait a minute, am I watching the right film? Did I pick the right one? Because I'm like, wait, this is Afghanistan. So it threw me for a minute. But no, this definitely does fit in. Set in post-Taliban Afghanistan, At 5 in the Afternoon follows Nokhre, a young woman who dreams of becoming the president of her country. As she navigates the challenges of daily life in a war-torn society, including attending a secular school and caring for her family, Nokhre's determination and resilience shine through. Directed by Makhmalbaf, the film offers a poignant and thought-provoking exploration of the struggles and aspirations of Afghan women in the aftermath of the Taliban's rule, while also showcasing the ongoing evolution of the Iranian New Wave. So I guess let's just start there with the fact that this is an Iranian New Wave film, but our director here, she specifically chose to tell this story about the life of women post-Taliban in Afghanistan, and like this is the first film actually filmed there to kind of tackle all of this.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that picking films for a list like this, and one of the things that through our conversations I thought would be interesting to do is to look at limit cases, right? Look at films that are maybe too early for the period that we're thinking about, or films that are later in the period that we're thinking about. I mean, one of the things that we didn't include, because I think it would be a whole other can of worms, is like the social melodramas, the comedies that have emerged in the last 10, 15 years or so. And, I think those are taking a totally different tack, even if some of them are made around the same time as some of the films that we're talking about. This film, I think, definitely tells its story in a vein that is in conversation with other new wave films of the time. The director is the daughter of Mohsen Makhmalbaf, who is the one of the films that we're doing is one of his films. Nuno Goldun, the Bread and Flower Pot, A Moment of Innocence is the English title.
Yep, yeah.
And so he contributed to the script. It's a family of filmmakers. Everyone in the family has made an important film, and they sort of collaborate on their film works together. He was there when she was making the film. So was her younger sister, who made a really fascinating documentary called Joy of Madness, which is about the making of this film. And so as a teenager, she was sort of under the radar of some of the subjects, the non-professional actors who were in these films. And so she was able to film the negotiations between the director and some of the subjects who may or may not have wanted to appear in the film for various reasons. So it really is a collaborative project. And that's another thing that we should open up in our discussion of new waves, or consider at least, is if we only talk about them as the creative work of a lone genius, we miss a lot of the context. And stuff I was talking about with the magazines and festivals, that's part of the context. Another part of the context is this collaborative working environment, and these directors who are all contributing scripts to other directors and are mentoring others, and forming these kind of houses of creative activity.
Which definitely seems new wave, because that's definitely was a big part of the French New Wave as well.
Yes, yes, like everybody appearing in each other's films, working on each other's films. This kind of cottage industry, approach to filmmaking rather than an industrial approach to filmmaking, where you are the employee of a corporation. In the counter example, that's not happening here. But specifically to your question about why does she go to Afghanistan? I mean, I think this is something that's happening at this time, and it's happening with her films as well as her father's films. They're making films in neighboring locations. I mean, she made another film, which I think is a brilliant film, called Blackboards. We can add recommendations in the show notes if I feel like for each of these, if you're interested in this film, I can give you a list of 10 other films that would be worth looking at. But yeah, Blackboards is about Kurdish teachers with their blackboards on their backs, like teaching reading and writing to villagers. And it shares with this one some of the interesting elements of her visual style. Like, she's very interested in like compositions with monochromatic formal elements, like the blackboards, all the teachers with the blackboards on their back in that film. But in this film, it's the umbrellas, the umbrellas constantly opening and closing, and the way the sunlight comes through the umbrellas. I mean, there's a real interest in the sort of color palette possibilities in her location shooting. But I think, and going back to the theme about like, what I was saying before about Iran as a multi-ethnic society with all these regional differences, that extends to neighboring countries as well. And I think part of what they're doing here is exploring a previous interest in workers in Tehran of Afghan ethnicity or one of the ethnicities of Afghanistan coming and interacting with other characters, or the seminarian in Taste of Cherry is from Afghanistan, and so this kind of interest in making a film about Kurdish communities, this film about making a film about Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban, is an extension of that kind of regional curiosity among these filmmakers that only grows in the 2000s and continues.
Because it's specifically about the women in the community, and we're following this schoolgirl, and I can't help but feel like there's that sense of using this story to kind of also explore the life of women in Iran at the time, and just like, compare contrast type of situation, and looking at their lives and their struggles and their dreams and their ambitions and the ceilings that they are running up against.
Yeah. And I think the main actor in the film, she really carries.
Oh, she's great.
The film in terms of that performance, and that's a real testament to the ability to direct non-professional actors is its own kind of skill, especially when you're just coaxing these kinds of performances. And her first film, Samira, her first film is The Apple, which is about these girls, sisters who are sort of confined in a home, and they develop their own kind of personal language with each other. And it's about the oppressions of patriarchy, and about sort of exploring that in relationship to actors who are also part of the social world and that the fictional film is about. And so that's kind of what we see in this film. I mean, the film, it's very interesting to watch now, after another couple of decades of history have unfolded.
Sure. Yeah.
This was a period of interesting forms of optimism, and her talking about wanting to become president one day, and using Pakistan as an example, right? I mean, thinking about regional relationships, and she can't use the United States as an example because we've never had a head of state that was a woman. We never had a president that was a woman, right? Whereas the neighbors just over the border have, right? So she's looking there and kind of thinking about what feminism means in this regional context.
That was a great film, fascinating film to kind of end this journey of our exploration of this movement with. All right, well, we'll be right back. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll talk about where it's gone from here. I want to kind of wrap up the conversation with what this movement, the New Wave, has gone on to influence as far as contemporary Iranian filmmakers, and if we're seeing any senses of this movement influencing other filmmakers around the world as far as what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of influence around the world for sure. The production of art films, hasn't slowed down in Iran. I mean, there is of course a growing phenomenon of social melodramas, of comedies. I mentioned these other kind of genre films that have kind of emerged, and a number of directors who are sometimes talked about as new wave directors, who we didn't include on this list because their style moves in a direction that's very different from the style of most of the films that we're talking about here, or they're not really in conversation with the films that we're talking about here in the way that they need to be in order to make this list small. But one of the things that I think has shifted is, there was a time, when I was saying like, what is the origin point of this? And you're talking about what is the end? If we think about one of the origin points as this VHS distribution and art house film circulation and festival popularity in let's say the late 80s and the early 90s, and continuing for another decade or so after that, at that time, festivals were hungry for the opportunity to identify a new wave in the world cinema landscape, right? And it was like every year or two, there was like, okay, now we're really putting our finger on what the Taiwanese new wave looks like, or Brazilian cinema novo, or this new wave of this regional cinema in India that's different from Hindi cinema, right? Just new waves seem to be sort of proliferating from the 60s on, and when these film festivals really got going, but then into the 80s and 90s. And I think film festivals has kind of changed that structure of revealing a new movement that we didn't know about before. That has kind of changed in the curation of the festival. So this kind of identification of that in such an emphatic way has changed. But that doesn't mean that the art films aren't being made. And there's number of fascinating films. Like there's one film that's made in Iran that's shot in, it's a oneer. The entire film is shot in a single take, right? Thinking about those kinds of experimentation and influence around the world. I mean, there are a number of filmmakers in the diaspora who have connected to this tradition in one way or another. There's the famous photographer and filmmaker Shirin Neshat has made a film called Women Without Men that's sort of in conversation with this style. She's primarily working in New York. Ramin Barani has made a remake of Kiarostami's film. There have been a number of remakes of these films around the world. And of course, I think any filmmaker who's interested in exploring that boundary between nonfiction and fiction, that kind of reflection upon that boundary in their filmmaking style, turns to these films as a point of influence. They're certainly taught. I mean, I'm a director of a film studies program, and I can say, I've taught in 5 different universities at this point, and these films are a staple of the education that film students get when they go pursue a university degree in film studies. So they're a part of the alphabet that emergent filmmakers and film critics are learning in school.
Yeah. Well, and, I guess just last question to wrap this up, and I think this is an important one, but, as far as like promoting the legacy of these films for generations of filmmakers, film students, audiences, and everything, I feel like there are probably added complexities in the scope of making them available, of restoration and everything, because of it's already kind of more complex for the filmmakers to make the films, as you were talking about, because of the ministry, I think, that you said that they have to submit everything to. But then after that point, I'm guessing that there continue to be, especially as these films play around the world and have reactions from audiences and critics around the world, and then they're perhaps looked at differently as far as like, oh, is this a film that we want to continue promoting? And how does that affect the ability to make these films wider, more available, and to kind of preserve them, restore them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really is the central question of how we will engage with this body of work moving forward. Because I mean, we can't just only watch the films that are made available by, very influential and important and essential DVD release companies, right? Or streaming services. We need to figure out how to provide more films for those companies and those services to examine. And part of it is a question of censorship, as you're talking about, but some of it is also a question of copyright. I mean, if in order to get the funding to preserve a film, you need Italian cinema to buy. This is a problem my colleague ran into in preserving the Brick and the Mirror, doing a new preservation. You need an Italian company to buy the rights to show the film on television in Italy. If the film has one copyrighted piece of music in it, they can't broadcast the film without clearing the rights to that one little fragment of music, right? And these are films that are made in many cases, without clearing that copyright. So that, just in terms of outside of Iran, that presents a problem for preservation, or at least finding the funding for preservation. It's different for films. Like, a lot of these films are co-funded or co-produced by companies abroad, like MK2, the French production company has supported a lot of these films. The Doha Film Institute has supported preservation efforts, and the UCLA Film and Television Archive has done a lot of important work in preserving. I'm just shouting out to a couple of these important institutions have been doing this work. And so if the film is already out of the country, if there's a version that exists in a vault from a production company that helped to fund it, the preservation is much easier. If you're talking about a film where there's just one print that exists and it's at the National Film Archive, the archivists there, it's part of their job to be cautious and protect their materials and protect their institution. They want to be able to preserve this material for the long term. And so letting it out might be counterproductive to that goal. In some cases, there are private copies that preservationists have found in personal collections, or the filmmakers themselves would have an old copy of a film. And in those cases, it's really a question of part of the goal of this podcast is, and efforts like it is to increase awareness and to hopefully increase the possibilities for those organizations to want to and to be able to, whenever a print is available, to fund the preservation as quickly as possible. The Bologna Film Festival, Il Cinema Ritrovato, has been a major source of that work. My colleague Ehsan Khoshbakhsh has been doing a lot of that work. The World Cinema Foundation, Martin Scorsese. There are a lot of important figures in helping to fund these projects, but it's an ongoing effort, and this what we're doing today is part of that effort.
Any chance to kind of keep these films alive and get more people to see them, I think, is a valuable one, because they're definitely films worth watching and worth talking about. Kaveh, thank you so much for joining me here today to discuss all of these films and the Iranian New Wave cinema.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks.
I know you've got your book out. Do you want to real quickly plug it? And we'll have the link for it in the show notes, but you want to tell people what it's about?
Sure. It's called Relaying Cinema in Mid-Century Iran. It's about, I guess you could say, the period right before the films that we started talking about here in our discussion. So it kind of centers it goes back into the silent era and goes ahead into the sort of post-69 era, but mainly centers the 1950s and 60s. And it is about local filmmaking in Iran, the second half of the book. And the first half of the book is about the circulation of foreign films in Iran in the 50s and 60s, primarily Hollywood films. I talk about some other national origin films, but primarily Hollywood films in Iran, and going through all the magazines and looking at sort of reception history and looking at the distributors and how they were able to physically get the prints from one place to the next as part of this cultural history of cinema that needs to be written and explored in greater detail.
Well, it sounds fascinating. So again, we'll have the links for it in the show notes. And again, we really appreciate you joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we close, don't forget about our special bonus segment coming up for members of the Next Reel family of film podcasts. We'll be taking a look at 5 more Iranian New Wave films to further deepen our understanding of this important movement. Bashu the Little Stranger, A Moment of Innocence, Children of Heaven, Tales, and Taxi. If you're not yet a member but you want to join us on this extended exploration, visit thenextreel.com/membership to access this exclusive content. Next month, we'll be planning the perfect cinematic robbery as we dive into the thrilling world of heist films. We'll follow the meticulous plotting, the daring execution, and the inevitable twists that keep us on the edge of our seats. From suave sophistication to gritty intensity, we'll explore how these films create an intricate dance of tension and release. We'll discover the thrill of the con, the lure of the big score, and the bonds forged in the crucible of high-stakes crime. So grab your blueprints, assemble your crew, and join us as we crack the code on the enduring appeal of the heist genre. Thank you for joining us on CinemaScope, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. Music by Orcus, Itai Arman, and Jakub Pietras. Find us and the entire Next Reel family of film podcasts at truestory.fm. Follow us on social media at The Next Reel, and please rate and review us if your podcast app allows. Remember, your cinematic journey never ends. Stay curious.